I'm Erica. I am Nick's wife. He makes some somatic OCD videos for this channel. I've also made some videos previously for the families and loved ones of people who are suffering from OCD. I haven't made one recently, but I did want to make one today because we are approaching the 1 year anniversary of Nick committing to his recovery. May 1st is that day, so I wanted to do a little bit of a 1 year check-in. So I want to talk about how I'm different, how Nick is different, how our relationship is different, and just how we've kind of progressed over the past year. So I'm going to start with how I'm different. I've learned a lot through this process myself. I know I've said in previous videos that learning what the OCD sufferer is going through and how their recovery needs to happen, learning about that process is actually going to be really applicable to most people. So what I've learned, the biggest part about what I've learned through that is the rational versus irrational beliefs. I apply this to a lot of different situations in my own life, even though I don't have OCD. It helps me with my own stressors throughout life. If there's a particularly frustrating day that's going on or something has happened that is angering me, coming back to that irrational versus rational belief, I don't feel like I get as upset anymore. I also don't feel like when I do get upset, it lasts for as long. So that process has been super, super helpful, which is great because I don't get as irrational about things. I've also learned that I can cope with a lot more than I ever thought that I could. So at the darkest moments of Nick's suffering, those were also some of my own personal darkest moments. I remember crying myself to sleep many nights. I remember not sleeping well ever because Nick would come in and wake me up in the middle of the night and basically tell me he didn't want to live anymore. I knew whenever he woke me up that it was never going to be good, and it was happening most nights. And it was just a very, very dark place for both of us in different ways. And to be honest, when I have stressful and bad days now, not that it takes away from the fact that I'm stressed or having a bad day, but it does remind me that I got through that and I can probably get through this day as well. So I learned that I can cope with a lot more than I ever thought that I could. I've also learned, and this was really, really, really big, is that you can't do the work for somebody else. Prior to all of this stuff happening, I hate to call myself this because nobody wants to call themselves this, but I do think that I had a little bit of a control issue. I was a little bit controlling. And when you go through this process, you have, and I think just kind of in life, it's a good lesson to learn that you can't control other people. You can't force them to go through recovery. You can't do the work for them. You can be supportive, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's up to them. And this applies to anybody with any kind of condition, whether it's a diagnosable condition or not, or if they just have a lot of irrational beliefs. It's not up to you to fix it for them. It's not up to you to force a rational belief into their irrational mind or belief or whatever it is. You could plant a seed, but that's literally the best that you can do. You cannot force somebody to change or do the work that they need to do. That was a really big one, and it took a lot of time for me to realize that, and going through my own therapy with my own therapist. It was a lot of work. But once you kind of learn that, it's a lot easier to let other things go, especially, even just with regular people. In our own business, we deal with people all the time, and we can only do so much for them. Part of it is on them as well. I've also learned that not everyone will understand this process, and that's okay. I remember if you've watched any of our previous videos, you know that I was considering divorce. I know at one point Nick was saying that he wanted a divorce, and I'll get to that again in a minute. But when I was in those moments and I was at my darkest point, I didn't want to make a decision for myself, so I was asking everybody else for their opinion, and all of their opinions were different. It ranged from you needed to leave yesterday to how can you leave someone at their darkest moment, and a lot of it was coming either way was coming from people not understanding OCD, particularly when they were saying that you need to leave. They were saying, or they were coming from a place of not understanding why Nick couldn't just stop thinking about his blinking because they don't have it. So not everybody is going to understand this process. They're not going to understand your decisions. But that's okay because you are ultimately the person who knows what's best for you. I'm really glad that I didn't leave. I'm really glad that I actually stayed, even though it was literally the hardest thing for me to do. I don't know that I would have been able to stay much longer if he hadn't have committed to his recovery on May 1st. I don't know if I would have been able to stay for much longer. But I am glad that I did, and I'm really glad, obviously, that he committed to his recovery. But again, not everyone's going to understand your choices, and that's okay. I've also learned to trust my own judgment, kind of related to that. Again, people's opinions are just people's opinions. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the word of God or gospel or whatever. It's not, their opinion is not state of law. It's just an opinion, and I needed to learn to trust my own judgment and know that I was going to make the decision that was best for me. And then the last thing that I have on my little list right in front of me is that I understand OCD better. I might not understand it firsthand, but I do understand the thought process, and again, not to the first degree, but I do understand a little bit better the perspective. And understanding that has helped me not be as judgmental towards others when they're maybe saying some irrational stuff or are suffering with their own thing. I think a lot of times in society we can say this person is good, this person is bad, this person is crazy, this person is not crazy, or just like black and white thinking. And it can be really easy to completely write somebody off based on that thought process. So I could think of a dozen different examples that have happened in the last year where either I was confronted with somebody who was saying some really irrational things, or could have been considered, like the things that they were saying might have been considered crazy, or somebody's talked to me about a situation where somebody was being like that. And it's a lot easier now for me to see, well, maybe this is what's actually going on, and they're not being rude or condescending or whatever it is on purpose. Maybe this is their thought process and this is their perspective. And it's a lot easier to not completely just write people off and say, oh yeah, either don't talk to them or I'm not going to talk to them or whatever the case is. So I understand OCD better. I also just kind of understand people as a whole a little bit better. How Nick is different. Nick, first and foremost, is a lot more rational. Before he was suffering from OCD at this magnitude, he definitely had a lot of other really big irrational beliefs. And I didn't have the language to put to that when it was happening. But, I mean, I think a lot of people suffer from this just in general, where they think, well, I'm giving you this advice. Why aren't you listening to me? You need to do it the way that I'm telling you to. That's just one example of some sort of like irrational belief that I can think of that he had prior to this. And I think he's a lot better at being rational about it and understanding, again, that his opinion is his opinion, his experience is his experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's everybody's experience. So he's a lot more rational that way, and in a lot of other thought processes as well. He has a lot higher of a frustration tolerance as well. So little things that may have set him off before no longer set him off. And then when he does get upset about things, he's able to calm himself down faster. And that's not to say that he's perfect at it. It's not to say that I'm perfect at it either. But he does calm down a lot faster. There are definitely still things that, I think both of us still need to work on. And I'm going to get to the point where I talk about us having bad days and us fighting and stuff. But just in general, he's able to calm himself down faster. I think I am too. But I definitely notice a huge difference in his frustration tolerance. Fights, I guess I'm going to talk about it now. Fights are a lot more rare. They usually happen when he's having his bad days. He still has bad days. And the fights normally happen on those days. It's pretty rare when he's having a decently good day or a really good day for us to actually fight. But again, he can calm himself down a lot faster, and the fight itself resolves a lot faster than it used to, on average, I would say. Before, we might fight and it might take a whole day for us to work through it. Now it might take an hour. On the really bad days, it might take a little bit longer. But it doesn't take as long for us to resolve the issue. But he's still working on things, and he's also, I just spoke to him, just before I did this video, we were talking about the things that he was doing before OCD took over his world, like the behaviors that he didn't think back then were an issue, but now going through the OCD process, he's realizing that they do not serve him and that they were kind of either a compulsive behavior or just an issue in general. So he's still working on those things. That's kind of where more of his attention has been focused lately. The somatic OCD side of things are doing so much better that, and I don't know if this is consistent across the board, but he's saying like somatic OCD is not really much of a problem anymore. I'm sure that there are still days where it does act up a little bit and bother him, but his biggest focus right now is on the other behaviors that he had prior to somatic OCD starting, that he didn't really realize were an issue. And then the last thing I have under this list for him is that he doesn't want to divorce me anymore. So that's nice. At one point, he sat me down. This was early when he started suffering. He sat me down and he said, and this was right after he started playing video games and we were fighting about it. He said, I don't want kids anymore. We need a divorce. And it was just like words out of his mouth that he has never said before. He's never said that he didn't want kids. It was always he wanted kids. So he sat me down and said, I don't want kids anymore. And this was more out of him not being functional. Like, how can I have kids if I can't even stop playing video games for an hour without thinking about them? So it was more of like a compulsive thing, I want to call it, but he doesn't want to divorce me anymore. So that's good. And I don't want to divorce him. I never wanted to divorce him. I felt like he just didn't want to be with me anymore because he was playing video games so much. But I never stopped loving him. So yeah, we don't want to get a divorce anymore, which is nice. How our relationship is different. Again, we don't fight as much anymore. When we do fight, it resolves a lot faster. But in general, we work better. We're more of a team, if that makes any sense. When he was suffering really bad, it was more of a me versus you mentality. Like, why are you like this? You should be wanting to spend time with me, or you should be understanding that I want to play video games and you shouldn't be limiting me to what I want to do. It was a very conflict-driven relationship, and we're much more of a team now. And a lot of that has to do with how we communicate with each other, and the mentality of I'm not against you, I'm for you. We can get through this together. So that's a really, really big one, and how our relationship is different. And that translates, about 4 months into his recovery, so September of last year, we started a business together. And I never would have done that if I didn't feel like he hadn't committed to his recovery fully. And even in those 4 months, he had made so much progress in those 4 months that I had no doubt in my mind that he would not continue to progress. So, I mean, we own and operate a business together. And to be honest, having gone through the OCD process and a lot of other life stressors, even before OCD, having gone through all of that before this, seriously owning a business feels like it's the easiest thing that we've done to date. So, especially with the combined with the fact that we operate more as a team now, running the business is usually pretty simple to do together. And then also coming from that like team idea, we share the responsibilities around the house a lot more evenly now. I remember when he was playing video games constantly, because he was playing video games constantly, I was the one that was cleaning the house. I was the one that was walking the dogs. I was the one that was going grocery shopping. Now, almost always we walk the dogs together. Almost always we go get groceries together. Almost always we split the house up and clean different areas of the house. It's a lot more 50-50, almost to the point actually with certain tasks that he takes them over a lot more than I do. For example, washing the dishes. I almost never wash the dishes anymore, and I didn't think that he would ever get to the point where he was washing dishes this much. So again, we're a lot more of a team, and that's just one example of it. So things are still progressing. It's a process. Things will not always be simple. I'm sure at some point things feel pretty consistent right now. At some point, I'm sure we'll hit hardship again. I'm sure we'll have really good moments, high moments. But things are not always easy, and they were never meant to be always easy. So accepting that was a big part too in this whole process, is that fairy tale, they lived happily ever after thought process that Disney spews to us is not real. There will always be some sort of conflict, maybe not every day, but there's going to be a conflict at some point. And I'm really happy that through this process, we've learned how to better deal with those. And again, it's not perfect. There's still days where I want to hit my head against a wall, but in general, it's still better than it was. So hopefully we just keep moving forward and improving that. Nick still has bad days, as I've mentioned. There's definitely some less than ideal habits on those bad days when they happen. Again, we're not perfect at dealing with conflicts at all. But again, we're working on it. He's working on it. I'm working on it. But it's a process. And I hope if you're watching this that if your loved one has not committed yet to their recovery, I hope that they do, but also realize they may not. And you're going to have to accept whether or not that is okay with you to be so close to. That's your choice. I was in that position and I did stay, but again, if he hadn't have committed to it, I don't know how much longer I would have lasted in the relationship. So I do hope that at some point you can get to the point where you're at your 1 year check-in and you're looking back and you're really proud of all of the progression that your loved one, your relationship with your loved one. I hope that you can look back at a year point and say that. I do recognize that not everybody is so lucky though. And if you are struggling with any of the progression of your loved one's recovery process, there is a community here. You can post comments in the comments below if that's something that you feel like you need to do. We can try to get back to that. But I do hope that everyone can have their 1 year check-in and say some positive stuff about how it's going. So yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day. Thanks, guys.